let's go on to vitamin D toxicity. So we've
Vitamin D toxicity. Oh, this is
well,
going to
no,
be
because
fun.
I think it's really important as part of this conversation. So we've established the challenges around how we've gotten to our vitamin D recommendations. If you Google how much vitamin D to take per day, you'll find that it says 400 IU is the recommended daily allowance, 600 IU is the upper tolerable limit. We've spoken about how they got to those numbers and some of the concerns and questions around this. But when you have this conversation, something that very quickly comes up is vitamin D toxicity, because we know that vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, kind of like vitamin A, and there's a lot of concern around toxicity, particularly with fat-soluble vitamins. So can you talk a little bit about vitamin D toxicity, why we're so scared of it, and where that comes from?
Right. If you're standing up watching this, you need to sit down because I'm gonna blow your mind a little bit now.
Be nice.
I'm gonna be nice, but everything I say right now, I'm gonna link all of the research papers that I have read and everything down below, because to understand this and understand what I'm about to tell you, you need to understand where the research comes from. And I'm gonna get my phone out for this one because I want to quote some of the papers here now, because vitamin D toxicity or overdosing has been completely blown out of proportion in my opinion, right? And before we did this talk, we were sat and I showed you some of the papers, and even you were like, okay, I see where your mind's going from here.
One of the biggest issues in today is that we're taking information from like 20 times removed from the primary source.
Yeah.
We're just assuming that because someone is educated in an area that they know what they're talking about, or because someone doesn't have clinical qualifications that they don't know what they're talking about. So always check the research for yourself. It's the best way to know that you're informed correctly.
1000%. So the two most claimed studies is one by Professor Veith and Professor Jones, so Glenville Jones, right? And both of them very active in the vitamin D research. And
highly quoted studies. So in a lot of blogs or even meta-analysis or videos around vitamin D, you'll notice these two studies are highly quoted.
So to kind of get into this, the main quotes used in every single toxicity report is this. Veith said, excessive vitamin D intakes have, however, been shown to have toxic effects. That's the one quote used in every single paper. The one from Jones, vitamin D toxicity results in hypercalcemia, elevated serum calcium caused by increased intestinal calcium absorption and mobilization of calcium from the bone. That's Jones 2008. Now, that's what people quote. But before you quote these, because when I read them, if you read that, you're going to go, oh, crap, better not overdose on vitamin D.
Both of those statements are true, by the way.
Oh, they're both true.
Excessive vitamin D can do that. So just to put that out there.
But then if you actually read the studies, they've been completely misquoted and being completely taken balance.
Putting it into context.
Well, I'm going to put it into context now. So if you read the paper, start with Veith, for example, one of the next quotes is, the UK guidance level is not the upper level limit, but it simply states that the person should take 1,000 IU without medical supervision. At nowhere does it state that it's the upper level limit. They just say you should take 1,000 IU. You can take it without medical supervision.
Where did they get 1,000 IU?
That's the big question. Even he can't work it out.
So he's just suggested that actually you should be able to take 1,000 IU per day without any medical supervision.
Yeah. And then I'm going to quote him from the exact paper. The definition of the upper level limit is ambiguous, and it's based more on what it is not than actually what it is.
Yeah.
So that's in the exact same paper. My quote said this, right? And I'm going to continue with the quotation of this. He then continues to say, the nutritional value for vitamin D should be defined as an amount of vitamin D equivalent to what an adult can acquire through exposing their full skin to the sun. And so that physiological intake from the sun for an adult might range up to 250 micrograms. That's equal to 10,000 IU.
Yeah.
So that's the same paper that's been misquoted.
The same paper that's quoted to caution about vitamin D toxicity is actually suggesting, if you read further in the paper, which a lot of people don't do, is actually suggesting that you need to be looking at about 10,000 IU.
Yep. And it's going to get even more funnier, right? He, in that paper, lists the different, what the legal definition of an upper level limit is according to the medical health advisors, the legal profession, clinical nutritionists, researchers, and ethics committees. But one of the most funniest part of the study, and what made me chuckle so much, was that he said, if you read the published reports on vitamin D toxicity, it wasn't until the blood serum level reached 500 nanomoles per litre.
Yeah.
So look where 50 nanomoles is, 50 nanomoles is, to look where 500 is. Do you know how much vitamin D you need to have to reach 500 nanomoles?
Oh, probably like 1 million IU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally a day.
Yeah.
Literally per day, you need 1 million IU per day. So that's the Veith paper. Let's talk about Jones 2008 because it came that paper out. This is the other misquoted paper. And the first thing he says is we surprisingly know very little about the mechanism of vitamin D toxicity. That's one of his quotes in his actual physical paper.
Yeah.
And he then talked about chylomicrons and the peripheral tissues. So one of the things about vitamin D is our body stores it. And what we know from the research, it doesn't store vitamin D until the blood level reaches above 40 nanomoles per litre. And our adipose tissues will soak up that vitamin D. So if you're really vitamin D deficient, it will drip feed it into the system because it wants you to function. And so he said, we actually don't understand how it's pulled into the skin. And actually, we don't talk about how much our body stores in. And that paper really indicated this. And
so what you're saying is that if your blood levels are already in the range of deficiency, then you most likely don't have any stored vitamin D or very little.
You won't have any stored
because it's going to concentrate your blood levels first.
Yeah, because it's going to go, right, we need to use this vitamin D. And like you eat some mushrooms, your body's just going to literally utilize that little bit of vitamin D because it's not
Which
storing
is why
it.
you have to be really careful when testing vitamin D that you're not supplementing with vitamin D, and that includes any of the foods that you regularly eat. You need to be checking your cereal boxes, your bread ingredients, mushrooms, meats, things like that. You need to be really careful about what you're eating in the lead up to a vitamin D test, because if you're deficient, it'll throw that straight into your bloodstream, and then it could give an error in calculation as to what your actual levels are like.
Yeah, completely right. And okay, I'm gonna just give you the last bit breakdown of that study, right? And when Jones said this in 2008, it kind of, I want to say, it put me on my ass a little bit because I was just shocked by it. He actually said that if you look at the studies on humans and animals, because he's had to quote them, part of what his research was, he said the threshold for toxic symptoms was actually 750 nanomoles per litre. So he said for safety and for cautionary, we should put that limit of vitamin D at 250 nanomoles per litre. So he's given you a margin of error of 500 nanomoles per litre. But these are the papers that we've been quoting. But it's not the case that they've been misquoted. People haven't read the actual physical papers. So once again, I'm going to link them at the bottom of the description. You can read them.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really important thing to discuss because there's such a massive fear about vitamin D toxicity in the kind of health and medical industry, but no one actually goes into detail about, well, where are we getting this fear? And like, let's look at the research and break down what's actually happening. No one can actually tell you that. They just kind of say, oh, well, it can be stored and it can cause hypercalcemia, hypervitaminosis, all these different kind of things. But we're not actually breaking it down. And something that I'd love you to mention as well before we move away from the toxicity element is the studies that were actually done on looking at administering toxic levels of vitamin D. Because again, if you actually go and try and find research that we have actually tested these toxicity levels, there's very, very little where we actually have administered extremely high doses. And the research where we have done that is shaky at best, but you can explain that better.
The study that people use a lot for toxicity is from someone.
Well, not just that they use a lot, but one of the very few studies out there that actually has discovered
you get it right
toxicity.
there. The very few studies.
Yeah.
It's Core et al. Once again, link in the description. And it was based on 16 or 17 patients in India. And it was done because there was either an error in supplements, where the supplements were too high in the vitamin D, or the clinician had made a mistake and was supplementing the person 3.6 million IUs of vitamin D in 6 weeks. The Core et al. Study literally lists the patients and how much vitamin D they were taking over 3 or 4 weeks or over a month. And it's in excessive amounts. They were literally getting intravenous injections of 600,000 IUs, right? But the study, if you actually look at it from, if you were like an ethics approval committee, the study doesn't make sense because it doesn't lay out any factors. It doesn't talk about in detail
Pre-existing conditions
or anything.
Yeah.
It just instantly puts the blame onto vitamin D and says the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency, vitamin D toxicity are things like dizziness, feeling lethargic, rushing to the loo. They're all symptoms of being exhausted and low vitamin D, and
they
also
haven't actually
diabetes and things like that. So it doesn't make sense. But
also, if you're injecting like 3.6 million IU of vitamin D, like that's insanity.
Yeah.
Like if you don't get an issue, I would be concerned.
Yeah. And so it's what really kind of like bothers me is this common theme of vitamin D toxicity. And if you actually read the study, in the UK, the most reported study states that 370 patients had vitamin D toxicity. That's a very low number. That's very low numbers, right? And in statistics, that's 0.0006% of the population.
Yeah.
Do you know how low that is? To put that into context,
It's almost statistically insignificant.
And Tracy, you're correct. That's statistically insignificant. And if you look at the MHRA's guidance, right, on the estimated data for people overdosing on paracetamol, it's around 68 to 70,000 people present in hospitals with overdosing of paracetamols. So you're telling me vitamin D is dangerous?
Well, I think, interestingly, having those statistics around paracetamol doesn't stop us from having clear guidelines about what the therapeutic dose of paracetamol needs to be. Because if you need paracetamol, there's a certain dose you need to take to support your symptoms. Whereas even though the data around vitamin D toxicity is essentially negligible, we still don't have recommendations about what the therapeutic dose actually needs to be to make a difference.
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
Yeah, Tracy, you're completely right there. And, once you've all lifted your jaws up off the floor, and because I think that's a lot of information to take up, but, rewatch this, read through the data downstairs, like it's like in the description, it's downstairs in the description, and you'll see that it's not just, this is what people have been pulling off.
Yeah.
And so that narrative needs to change now. Like, we need to understand vitamin D in its entirety more, because every single study that shows the benefits of vitamin D, it's above 150 nanomoles.
Yeah.
Where your blood level's above 150 nanomoles per litre.
And this is what we need to do. We need to be having these conversations. We need as many people as possible to be reading this data, reading this research, hopefully getting even more newer studies going on around vitamin D. And this is how we make a change.